so the talk is, I don't know how challenging and interesting it is, but transforming today's civilization for the future. And I called it sort of from Jakarta to Washington, D.C. Um, some of the basic facts today that we all know, but we sort of avoid talking about, is that we all live on one planet, on one global spaceship called Earth. And so if you're looking at the world today, you're located, some of you in Malaysia, some of you in Indonesia, um, some of us are all over the world, as the moderator just mentioned. And so what we have is a beginning of a planetary civilization, whether we like it or not. It's becoming less and less important which country we live in. We fundamentally speak a similar language. You can all speak English. If you go to an unknown country, if you go to China, if you speak another language, there's a Google Translator available. And so borders begin to matter less and less, unless you live in particular countries which have sort of the iron wall around them. At the same time, I don't know if, how many of you are familiar with the doomsday clock, or have ever heard about this notion? Any of you have ever heard of the doomsday clock? Well, the atomic scientists in the United States, after the development of nuclear weapons, tried to figure out and think regarding a way to see how close are we to the final catastrophe of a nuclear war. And we're actually approaching it very rapidly, with our speaker in Russia can sort of tell us how close we are to that. And so they've developed an atomic clock. And during the Cuban Missile Crisis between the United States and the Soviet Union, the world came about 2 minutes to midnight, and then late in the 1990s, it went to the 7 to 9 minutes to midnight. If you look at the world today in 2022 in January, before the war in Ukraine, the doomsday clock was moved to about 100 seconds to midnight, the closest that we have ever been to the final catastrophe, citing the threat of global nuclear war, dangers of environment, and deterioration of democracy in major countries. And the publicly available information, you can Google it and you can get it from their website. If you look at today, and today we're sort of later, the war in Ukraine started on February 24th, 2022. So the doomsday clock is a bit off. If you look at the world is in a complete mess today, and it's probably about 60 minutes to midnight, with and we'll have a speaker from Russia. Maybe they can tell what they're saying in Russia, how close are we to using nuclear weapons in this day and age. And so the definition of success today, so what's the definition of success for the planet? And something that is success for Malaysia, something that's success for Indonesia, for Russia, for the United States, for anybody who lives on this planet. And it's defined, and I figure the people who are making the greatest difference in this world are folks who are sort of moving the industries and thought forward. And there are only very few of them. And one of them I consider is Jeff Bezos, whether you like Amazon or not. And Bezos says that the solar system can support 1 trillion people, and the Earth will be preserved like a Yellowstone National Park, thinking that where we today, in order for us as a species to survive, for all of our cultures, languages, anything to survive, we need to have booming population that lives out in space. And if you've heard of Michio Kaku, there are lots of different scientists. Michio Kaku is one of the most popular ones. He talks about traveling to Mars, traveling to the stars, and we need to move beyond the planetary sort of borders. I don't know if you have, how many of you have ever heard of Tesla or Elon Musk? I think they're becoming, how many of you in Indonesia? As I believe Tesla is about to build a plant in Indonesia. Is it about right?
Yes, sir.
Yeah, I think that Tesla is going to put a gigafactory in Indonesia or some kind of a development. Elon Musk talks about launching a spaceship in the Swiss SpaceX to developing a civilization on Mars, and they're about to launch the spaceship to Mars, hopefully within, by I believe 2025, if everything works out well. Now, where are we today on the sort of planetary development? If you look at the civilization as a whole planet, the whole, irrespective of where we live with all our small local and national problems, one of the interesting scientists in actually former Soviet Union was Kardashev in the 1960s. And he's sort of thinking about if the civilization develops outside of its own borders, how much energy is it going to use? And he sort of thought of three types of civilizations. The first civilization is the one, type 1, that uses the energy on a planet, sort of somewhere where we're approaching today. A level 2 civilization would be using the energy of its own star. And level 3 would be using the amounts of energy that within its own galaxy. Now, where are we today? If you look at the planetary civilization, and we're somewhere 0, where we haven't reached any of those types. We're sort of type 0 civilization, and possibly approaching the level type 1 civilization, using the sort of planetary civilization, using the energy of the planet, and we're nowhere even near types 2 and type 3. What do we mean by the type 0 civilization, sort of the Stone Age civilization, where we fundamentally we're disjointed, most societies are in competition, today we're at war, we're fairly ruthless, and fundamentally, if you look at the most scholars, we're insane in academia, business, and if you look at the government and politics, it's absolutely insane what's happening worldwide. And so there is a sort of a leadership quest, and sort of what is it we need to do? And we need to move the civilization into the type 1 planetary civilization if we actually survive as the people and as a species. And these are some of the challenges that I think us as scholars we need to solve. And some of those problems sort of accumulate around innovation, leadership, and hierarchical organizations. So where are we today? And the type 0, slave labor, and if you look at about 200 to 300 years from today, the way work, the things we got accomplished was through slave labor. If you read Max Weber, if you look, read what type of, let's say, if you look at Russia in the 17th century, it was predominantly a slave labor, and in many other societies. Where are we today? Today, and it is as true as for Indonesia, it is as true for Malaysia, it is the same true for the United States, Europe, or anywhere on the planet where you go. There are organizations, and you're an employee in an organization. Where we replace the sort of slave labor with managerial employees. There's a need for association members, and I'll explain a little bit. To move into the type 1 civilization, there's a need for association members, a slightly different way from managerial employees. And type 1 and type 2, I can't even begin to think about it. It's certainly association members, but there's a lot of other things. And so type 1 requires for a fully developed human being developing his or her capabilities to pursue lifelong dreams and talents. Okay, so if you look at it today, what is the type 1, sort of, if you're trying to build the planetary civilization, type 1, what are the basic requirements? And these are only some of the basic requirements that I see sort of from the point of organization. There are other requirements from the point of technology in other areas, in other dimensions. If you look at the organizations, in order to move to the planetary civilization, there is a need for massive and growing population. So any country that has a massive population, and I believe those are actually in Indonesia is actually, you guys are right up there, China. So any country that wants to become a leading world power and playing a leading role needs a massive, fundamentally huge population. Now, there is another requirement for this, is having massive organizations. If you look at the world's largest organizations in your country, in any country, they're fundamentally large and they're employing a great number of people. It cannot be, it's not possible to achieve the type 1 civilizations through either slave labor. It's also impossible to achieve it through managerial hierarchy, which I sort of termed it a managerial hierarchy, because fundamentally people work there and in fear. If I look at research and the research that I've done, about 80% of people who work for managerial organization saying that they're operating there, there's lots of fear in that company. So what's a basic unit of any society? And what you find it in every society, and it's as true as for Malaysia, Indonesia, if you travel to Latin America, North America, Europe, fundamentally the world consists of families. There was a different definition of families years from ago, but today it's sort of everybody has a uniform understanding of the family. It's not a managerial employment hierarchy. The wife doesn't work for the husband doesn't work for the wife, but it's some kind of a partnership following the traditions and cultures of any country. And the family's foundation, if you look at your family or any family, is trust. And so managerial hierarchy's foundation is fundamental fear. And so if you look at all of the organizations, some of them are fear-based, some of them are trust-based. Employment hierarchy's fundamental basis is fear. And that's where we are sort of, the world population today is engaged. About 80% of people who work today for a wage or salary are employed by those systems. Trust-based organizations are fundamental family partnership, and there are other types of organizations. And if you look at the managerial hierarchy, it's fundamental. It's about 80 to 90% fear that's employed. When you're in fear, you cannot work. I'll go back. If you're in fear, you fundamentally, when you're under pressure, you really cannot be creative, and you cannot create. And so anything that you do in a managerial hierarchy, operating under fear, is fundamentally a wasteful effort. And so some ideas have been popping up throughout the century. One of them is a great one, is a universal basic income, meaning that every citizen of a country should be receiving some kind of a universal income, so that that particular person can select an occupation that he or she likes and chooses. So in a way, in a planetary type of civilization, every citizen has to be sort of become a secure member of the society in order for to choose occupation freely. A simple question for those of you who have kids: do you want your children to be secure or insecure in the adulthood? And so that's sort of the cause for sort of hoarding wealth and all kinds of crazy behaviors that you look at sort of today's oligarchs. So there's a requirement for, at least basic requirements for universal basic income and universal basic rights to attain security. So if you look at the societal development, so where we have been 200 years ago and where we're today and where we're going into the future, if you sort of jump back into the 1800s, the planet looked very differently than it looks today. It was a fundamentally an agrarian society with limited number of populations, usually run by monarchies. And something happened in around 1840s, 1850s. Some call it the Industrial Revolution. I call it the Great Shift. So we went into sort of the new type of society appeared, sort of the democratic society. Sort of here's the modern industrial civilization that we know of. Now there's another shift is about to happen in 2040, 2050, barring the nuclear war happening anytime between, let's say, Russia and its neighbors. But there is a global civilization that's possibly becoming even in our lifetime. When you look at this, some of the basic requirements, if you look at around 1800s, the population of the United States, and I believe the same sort of numbers hold true for all countries, and take a look at your countries. It was about 3.9 million. If you look at the population of the country today, it increased by about 100 times. And so for us to move into the next shift, the population has to increase about 100 times again. And so what type 1 civilization of tomorrow, as looked about, is there's a need for a multi-planetary civilization, at least according to Elon Musk. The security, we all should somehow get either universal basic rights and universal basic income, every citizen of the society, and that's becoming possible with the development of technology. We need to transform the hierarchy into a member-like hierarchical structure. I didn't go a lot into this in this presentation, but there's a requirement for massive organizations of people who want to be there, and not with people who are there because they need to receive a paycheck. And so sort of a simple test that I run, if you won a lottery, would you stay in your current role or would you leave? And if you look at any managerial organization anywhere, most people, there'll be mass exodus from organizations today. Further, and thinkers like Elon Musk thinks that we should completely rethink government, and he talks about Mars to get rid of special interest and coercion of politicians, and offers sort of a way of direct democracy. Perhaps we need to rethink how government is operating, and perhaps it's time for a direct democracy rather than through representatives. And so from the era of hierarchy to the era of innovation, what fundamentally has changed the civilization of yesterday was changes in technology. And it happens that at the convergence of new technologies at the same time, primarily energy, communication, and transportation. And so out of the necessity of moving railroad, managerial hierarchy was born. Until if you go into the 1800s, it actually never existed, not in your country, nor in any country. Right now, there's a development of different technologies, which there's a potential for free energy with the nuclear fusion. There's a potential of medical breakthroughs, potential of growing crops differently, potential for new housing, nanotechnology. And so all of those technologies are converging at around 2040 to 2050, depending on different things within the society. And so that after that, Michio Kaku talks about the era of magnetism with room temperature semiconductors to create permanent magnetic fields, and so you can have a fundamentally different means of transporting people, fundamentally different means of communications. Facebook is developing those headsets, thinking that you can go into the artificial intelligence. So you can actually put a neural link through Elon Musk, Tesla, and have internet in your head. So we're developing something new, and that something new requires a different organization, sort of as a reflection of a technological era. And that current managerial organization, as we know of it today, it's time to rethink. And sort of that rethinking is sort of I think it's our job, the job of sort of scholars and the job of practitioners. And so type 1 multiplanetary civilization, the world can't support 1 trillion people. We need to think about the Mars and beyond. And we need to sort of move forward. And so what can we do in order to build that civilization of a multiplanetary organization, a sort of multiplanetary civilization? And we must transform the organizational entities for our species survival to build that type 1 multiplanetary civilization. And fundamentally, every single organization, how we organize ourselves to conduct work on the planet must be rethought. Whereas currently what we have, it's obviously it doesn't work. And it's actually lots of scholars I put Edward Deming. Today is the 122nd anniversary, I think, and Deming's birthday. So sort of glad to give this talk on Deming's birthday. And fundamentally, our future depends on it. And what happens here, what happens in your country, we're all here on the same sort of small. It wasn't my call, it a small spaceship Earth. With that, I think that's sort of the gist of the talk.